Hi, I'm Amy, and this is A-Star Reads, and it is time for week 5 of the Great British Bake Off book recommendations. And I'm excited about this week because it's German week. It's a unique thing. They haven't done German week before, but it seems like at least recently in the past few seasons, they've started doing specific countries where they're doing pastries and things like that that remind them of that country. Because sometimes they make little errors like they did in German week this time. But anyways, the Great British Bake Off is this wonderful baking competition show that just is so positive, and at least right now for me in Washington, in the area I live in, we need a lot of positivity because there have been some really, really horrible flooding, and I'm currently on an island, and it didn't used to be an island where I live, so until things clear up, I'm stuck here. I can't make it to town. Luckily, we are high enough that we're not affected by the flooding at all, but we are trapped in a sense because all the roads are flooded around us, so there's no way to get on and off. So it's a time for positivity. I watched the Great British Bake Off last night, and it was so positive as usual. Sad because of losing amazing people at this point. But you know, it always does make me feel a little brighter. So this idea actually came about because of Ruby from Ruby Red. She did a version of this on her channel that took in more of the general themes of the Great British Bake Off, and she gave book recommendations for the themes in particular. And so it was really good. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, go check out her channel. I recommend it. I just loved this idea. Thank you, Ruby, for letting me take the idea and run with it. All right, let's get started with the first challenge. It was the signature challenge. For this, they wanted the contestants to make 12 German biscuits. So basically 12 German type cookies. So because that was such a general prompt, I actually decided to narrow it down to my favorite German biscuit, which is the Pfeffernusse. Every year during the holidays, I like to buy some Pfeffernusse and have them because they're so delicious. What they are this dark spice cookie. And they definitely taste different, and they're a different texture than gingerbread cookies. So don't think gingerbread so much. Think more of like a spice cake, but in cookie consistency. They're even spicier in a sense. And they're usually either covered in powdered sugar or they're covered in like a sugar glaze that kind of hardens a little bit. I really love them. They're so delicious. And for me, they feel nostalgic in a sense because even though I haven't eaten them all throughout my life, they've become a holiday tradition. So to pair with that Pfeffernusse cookie, I decided to go with Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. And this is a really fun story that I enjoyed. I read it recently. The reason that I'm pairing it with this book is because there is a dark story that underlies this whole book. So it kind of has that darkness of this cookie. And there's a spice to it because they're two very powerful, charming women. And one of them has lost some of her power, but through this book, she finds her power. And it's wonderful to see their sister relationship, but there is spice between the two of them because they don't always get along. They have history. They have issues that have come up in the past because their personalities are so different. I feel like the dark spice works for this story because there's a sweetness to the whole story and it is really enjoyable, but it also does have themes that are a bit hard. They're difficult themes. The other reason I feel this matches well with the Pfeffernusse cookie is because I feel like Practical Magic is very much a holiday seasonal kind of read. You know, you read it during the fall time, you read it during Halloween. It has that holiday vibe, just like the Pfeffernusse has a holiday vibe for me. So that's how I match the cookie with the book. Okay, so next we have the technical challenge. And the technical challenge was okay, let's try this. Prinzregententorte. I don't speak German, so please bear with me. Prinzregententorte. That's the best I can do at the moment. It's a beautiful cake covered in dark chocolate, has many, many, many thin layers of, I don't remember what kind of cake it was in particular, but thin layers with like a ganache in between, and then it's covered in a dark chocolate glaze, and then you've got these little crowns. So what makes this cake unique and special is that it was actually created in 1886 for the first time for the Prince Regent of Bavaria, and his name was Luitpold, I think. And it was made to be very decadent, very rich, beautiful looking cake because it's made for a prince. Based on looking at this cake, and I have never tried one before, but based on looking at it, I would say that 2 or 3 bites would probably be enough because it looks like it would be really heavy and sweet. Maybe not too sweet because of the dark chocolate, but just rich. And that may not be true, but that is the assumption I'm making, and that is an element I'm going to use to pair my book, so let's hope I'm right. And if you've ever tried a Prince
If you've ever tried a Prince Reagan tort, Reagan tort, Reagan tort. And if you've ever tried a Prince Reagan tort, torta, Reagan tort. And if you've ever tried a Prince Reagan torta.
Reagan and torta? Reagan and torta? I don't know. I could say it the once maybe because I just heard how they said it, but I'm sorry. I apologize for my pronunciation. That is a hard word. It's a very long word too. If you've ever tried that cake, let me know in the comment section down below if it really is very rich and if it's a little too much if you have too much of it. So the book that I'm gonna pair with this cake is hopefully gonna work, but we'll see. It's gonna be Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which I read recently and I really enjoyed. It was very unique, it was very interesting, and there are elements to it that I think work with this cake. The main character, Noemi, goes to this place called High Place, and it is owned by this family of people. I can't remember their names right now, but it's owned by this family of people that have a very long history of living there. They have a very long history of being sort of the elite in the area, an elite in their lineage in a sense. This cake was made for royalty and it has a long history since the 1880s. So like, to me, I think that those two elements match up quite well. And there's something about the snobbiness a bit of the royalty element to it that really works well with the family from Mexican Gothic. And of course, it's this beautiful, elegant looking cake, just like our main character, Noemi. She's this aesthetically good looking woman who really makes sure to keep up her appearance while also being this incredibly hardcore feminist, which I really enjoy, especially considering it was set in the 50s. The story itself is interesting because there's a lot of layers to it, just like there's a lot of layers to this cake. She thinks she's gonna find out something about her cousin's situation that's a little more above the surface. Is she suffering from mental illness issues? Maybe, but the reality is so much deeper than that. There's a lot more layers within this family, within the stories that are being hidden, like that glaze that covers the whole entire cake, and then when you cut into it, you see all these layers. And I feel that that works for the prompt as well. The final element to it is that the story gets progressively more sickening in a lot of ways. Like, it makes you sick to your stomach in certain parts, which I imagine you feel if you eat too much of this cake. So I think this works. I think I argued it well, and you can let me know in the comment section down below if you think I'm wrong. All right, let's go into the Showstopper Challenge. So the Showstopper Challenge was where the production crew made a little bit of a snafu with the German theme. And that's because they asked the contestants to make a 3-tiered yeast-leavened cake. And as Jürgen said, who is the German contestant on the show, he's like, we don't typically make these into layered cakes. So it was a little out of what is normally found to be in German cakes, but the Showstopper always has to be something big and grand, so I think that's why they decided to make it a tiered cake sort of thing. So anyways, the point is that German cakes are often and typically leavened by yeast. So here in the US and in a lot of other countries, we use leavening agents such as baking soda, baking powder to create cakes now, as opposed to yeast. You can definitely find yeast leavened cakes in other places, like in Italy they have panettone, and they have other, I think, brioche. Some people consider certain brioches to be kind of cake-like, even though it's a lot of times more like a bread. Depending on how you make it, it can be more cake-like. Anyways, the whole point is to say that in Germany, it is very traditional to use yeast to leaven your cakes. This was actually a very tricky one for me. I wasn't sure where to go with this, but what I ended up going with was a book that I actually really ended up enjoying, and that is All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Marquez. And the reason I went for this one is because it's a classic novel, and so it goes with that whole traditional element to it. It's a traditional type of German cake, and this is a classic German novel because All Quiet on the Western Front takes the perspective of a German soldier during World War I, and it's written by a German author, and I thought that that worked with this prompt, kind of keeping it more traditional. The other reason I paired these two, and this is where you have to bear with me. When I think of a yeast leavened anything, honestly, I think of something that is growing. It's creating carbon dioxide, putting it into the gluten structure, which causes the dough to rise. And of course, yeast is alive, it's fresh, it's working really hard to create something. And so I thought this worked really well with our main character, who's this young, fresh boy who's growing into be a man slowly, because he's pretty young. And he's just so excited about life, about the world. His teacher actually convinces him and his classmates to enlist for World War I. And unfortunately, I mean, it's sad. It's actually sad because he's a young boy and he's just excited about living life, about protecting his country. He kind of gave me that same vibe as the yeast. So I hope you agree with me because that is my book recommendation for the 3-tiered yeast leavened cake. Okay, so now let's talk about the winner of the show-stopping challenge. And no surprise here, it was Giuseppe. He did an amazing job and he created an Amarena cherry Gugelhupf cake. We typically think of them as bundt cakes, so it was a bundt cake. The interesting element to this cake is that it was actually originated in Austria, and it was popularized because Marie Antoinette brought it to her marriage in France when she married Louis XIV. The bundt cake took off, and that's why we know and love the bundt cake so well nowadays. It's called Gugelhupf in Germany, and it is a very popular cake there, and very popular for celebrations. So, the book that I'm pairing with the Amarena Cherry Gugelhupf cake is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. The reason that I'm pairing these two is because this cake was made popular because of a marriage. It was made popular because of Marie Antoinette's marriage to Louis XIV. And Rebecca is all about this kind of hasty marriage that starts in the very beginning between our protagonist, who is not Rebecca, to Maxim de Winter, who is a widower, and his wife's name was Rebecca. So we've got this very hasty, dramatic, exciting marriage. And so I think that those match well for that reason. The other thing is that Amarena cherries are this dark, sour Italian cherry. And you know, Italy is on the Mediterranean. And the protagonist meets Maxim de Winter in Monte Carlo. Granted, they're different countries, but they're still on the Mediterranean. And so that's something there. I mean, that's not a huge element, but I just kind of throwing that out there because it's something. Aside from that, let's think about the actual cherry. Amarena cherries are dark and sour. And so, like, this story is a gothic novel. It's a gothic mystery. So obviously there's an element of darkness to this. And then the sourness is what our protagonist feels when she goes to Manderley and she realizes that everyone loved Rebecca so much and she can't compete. She can't compare. She cannot live up to Rebecca's image. And so it's very sour for her, you know, this is very bittersweet because she goes into this amazing marriage being very excited, but at the same time, when she gets to Manderley, life is not what she expected it to be. Okay, let's talk about the losing cake. And this was a very sad one because we lost Freya this week. And, you know, she was a very sweet, young baker. She was 19, so like she has the world ahead of her. But she was actually pretty ambitious, I thought, with this. And so she tried to create an upside down poached pear tiered cake. And it didn't work out. It basically just, it kind of melted all around her. It was terrible. So for this one, I actually decided to go with Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And this is why, and it's gonna be kind of sad, the reason I picked this, but hear me out. So for one, upside down cake is a classic cake that you think of like from the 50s that my grandma loved to make. And so I wanted to pair it with a classic novel. Of Mice and Men is a very classic novel. It's one that most people read in school because of the themes in it. Why I paired these two more so than the whole classic element to it is that Freya had amazing intentions. She really was being ambitious, and although she is sweet and kind and innocent, it really all fell apart for her in the end. And the same can be true for Of Mice and Men. We have a character who is really sweet, has good intentions, not a bad person. He just has some developmental issues. Of course, at the time, in the 30s, they didn't understand that. And things absolutely fall apart for our character and his best friend. So like, it's a really, a really sad way to compare these. But when I was thinking about Freya's situation, the first thing that came to mind was the situation Of Mice and Men, and just the similarities in, you know, granted, Freya's is a lot different than Of Mice and Men, but sort of like that initial good intentions that don't work out in the end, that really do fall apart. So I hope that doesn't seem insensitive. I really don't. But the themes were kind of the same in some ways. So if you think these worked, let me know. I I think they did, but I did struggle with German Week quite a bit, and it just seems to be getting harder every time. And I'm trying to make these work. I'm like, am I going to run out of books that will actually work for the prompts? I'm a little worried, but we're just going to keep going. We're just going to keep going and seeing how it goes. If there are suggestions you would have made for these book prompts, let me know in the comment section down below, because I was struggling. These were difficult prompts. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe so you can see the next one, because I think the next one's pastry. I'm not sure, but stay tuned and you'll find out shortly. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.